listening to the Bigfoot Society podcast, and I'm Jeremiah Byron. Every week I talk to individuals who have experienced Sasquatch in some way or another, so you won't want to miss an episode. Make sure you're subscribed on the platform that you're listening to, and share this episode with a friend. It does not cost a thing, and it helps the show continue to grow. If you'd like to hear Bigfoot Society episodes early and ad-free, you can do so by becoming a Patreon supporter or a YouTube channel member. Links to those are in the show notes. In Bigfoot Society, I've taken far too much of your time so far, so let's get on with the show. Welcome to a special year-end 2023 wrap-up episode where I went through all the episodes that we released this year and looked at what were the top listened to episodes according to the numbers in the audio podcast. I've then gone ahead and went through all of those episodes and picked out my favorite bits from those particular episodes. You may find some in this episode that you've never heard before, so you can go into the show notes, check out the links, and then listen to that episode you may have missed. If you don't agree with these top 10 and you think your episode that you liked was a little bit better, go ahead and put that in the comments. We can get a conversation going. But going by the download numbers from the audio podcast version, here's what we got. Coming in at number 10, Beans Baxter shares about the infamous village of Portlock, Alaska, and the intense Bigfoot attacks associated with its history.
So Portlock was a little fishing village. It's in Port Chatham. As you leave the harbor here and head out into Kachemak Bay and turn the corner into the real ocean, and then head down about 40 miles or so. When you get to the very tip of the peninsula, there's a little bay in there called Port Chatham, and inside Port Chatham is Portlock. A lot of people think that there was a town called Port Chatham and a town called Portlock. Port Chatham's the bay, and Portlock's the town. And I actually had that clarified by someone who lived in Portlock, who grew up there. So there's no confusion of that. I still hear people say that every once in a while, and I'm like, that's not accurate. And so it was just a little fishing village. It had a sawmill. It had the cannery. And what a lot of people don't really realize is back then they didn't have a lot of the regulations that they do now with fishing and stuff like that. And it wasn't really a free-for-all, but again, it was a little bit like the Wild West. And the sawmill built these like fish traps, and that's what they used for catching the salmon in. They put them like at the head of the bays and the creeks and stuff, and they would just swim into them. And they had the logging operation that fed the sawmill that made the traps, and then they were catching all the fish. So right there, you've got they were taking the trees and they were taking the fish. So that right there might be perceived as a potential threat, a resource threat to any Sasquatch that were living in the area. So you start hearing these stories. I think, I don't have my notes in front of me, but I believe right around 1908 or something like that was around the first time there was an entry in one of the cannery logs about the people didn't want to work because there was something in the forest that was like coming into town and bothering the people. And they actually hired some like Pinkerton like guards to like watch the town so the people would come in and work. I spoke with a gentleman whose grandmother actually worked in the cannery when she was a little girl. I think she said, or he told her, and he told me that she was like 8 years old or something like that. Said she was making 30 cents a day or something like that for working in the cannery. So they didn't have unions or child labor laws back then.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Imagine that, you wake up, you're 8 years old and you get woken up and you're like, all right, you're not going to go play today. You're going to go work in the cannery.
Oh, man.
And you're getting 30 cents a day. So the town, it was growing. It was bustling. They were having some good years with the fish. And then 1938, you had a prospector go missing. Somebody came in, went up into the hills to look for gold. He turned up missing. He had the death of Andrew Camlock, who was out running a logging operation. They found him dead. They said that he was crushed with a piece of logging equipment that was too big for a man to lift or a person to lift. And they blamed this thing they called the Nantinaq, which is their version of a Bigfoot. And I mentioned this in the book, and it's pretty cool because, you hear Nantinaq means Bigfoot. And technically, they say Nantinaq means a giant hairy thing or big hairy man. And then you also hear it doesn't really translate well, and there's no official translation for it. And that's my favorite definition, is that one, is it just doesn't translate well, that we don't understand what it is. They give it a bunch of different abilities, the Kushtaka and some of the other native lore creatures. They say it can shapeshift. They say it has red eyes. They say it comes when it's foggy. It can come on the mist. They give it some supernatural attributes. And it was a time when people were uncertain and they were scared. They weren't sure what was going on. And eventually by 1950, the town was abandoned and nobody lived there anymore. The postmaster, they said, was the last person to leave. Over time, the legend kind of grew and got exacerbated. I know on the internet, I can't believe something got blown out of proportion.
This is weird, guys.
Yeah. It got turned into a Bigfoot massacre, which it wasn't. Basically, there was a series of strange and unfortunate events that they attributed to the Nantinaq that may have been responsible, but there were also some economic reasons and stuff that led up to the abandonment of the town. But you still have missing people. You still have unexplained deaths. You still have Bigfoot sightings there. There was a gentleman who said that he saw a Bigfoot walking along the beach. He said it was carrying a club. The gentleman, he's passed away now. He had passed away before I read his account, but I would love to sit down with that gentleman and ask him, like, why did you say club and not stick or log? Like, why did you say he was carrying a club? But yeah, there's just a lot of Bigfoot lore, Nantinaq lore in that area. And honestly, it may have had something to do with the town being abandoned and people wanting to leave. But personally, I don't think it was the main reason. I think it might have been a contributing reason. A lot of times today, Jeremiah, with like things, there's a lot of divisiveness. There's not a lot of maybe, okay, this person believes this and this person believes that. Maybe he has a good point and she has a good point. Maybe there's some truth that it's got to be this way or it's got to be that way or nothing. And I've heard a lot of people say, like, oh, there was no Bigfoot massacre. Then that whole story is bunk. And there's some good stuff in there. There's some good, scary, creepy stuff in the history of Port Chatham, but it wasn't the Bigfoot massacre that some people make it out to be. You do have the resources being depleted. They were taking the trees, they were catching the fish. If there was like a perfect storm to create an angry Bigfoot, or to create a avenging Batman Bigfoot, it would have been that time and probably that place, because I think it's a very good environment for them. Honestly, it's not a hop, skip, and a jump away from Area A, but it's not beyond the realm of possibility to believe that you could walk to Area A from there. It would take you a long time, but it could happen.
Oh, really?
And it's a lot of the same terrain. There are some like glaciers and stuff you would probably have to cross over. I'm not going to say a human couldn't do it, but it would be very difficult, but it's not beyond the realm of possibility. They're connected by land. It's just a lot of land in between them.
There's a documentary that you had, I believe it was you with Stephen Major that had put together about the expedition to go out there as well. People can read your book, but they can also watch it on certain platforms as well. Did you notice anything once you actually got there in person and you set foot in the area? Was there anything that stepped out to you that you hadn't really made the connection before you'd been able to go there in person?
It was an amazing experience. It was one of those things that I wish I could go back and experience it again for the first time.
Yeah.
Because just stepping off the boat and getting there and then just realizing how wild it is and how thick the forest is. We're walking through there. We're bushwhacking. I couldn't imagine going there today and building a town. Like, it just, to me, it would just seem, and these people, they didn't have chainsaws. They didn't have, they didn't have heavy equipment. They didn't have four-wheeler. They didn't have anything that we would take over there with us to help make any kind of endeavor like that easy. And you got to think, these people are showing up probably with like axes and rope and just whatever and they're building houses and they're clearing trees and they're just making this, they're civilizing this place, putting a village here. And I can't imagine doing that today with today's technology, just what an undertaking that would be, just how thick it is and how unforgiving the terrain is. And that was one of the things that really struck me. It was just like, man, I can't believe this place was ever a town, just as wild as it is.
Always a pleasure to talk to Beans about what he's experiencing up there in the great state of Alaska. But let's head on over to number 9 next. A lot of people feel different ways about this episode. Number 9. Country is an individual from Oklahoma who approached me with some incredible tales of Bigfoot interaction over the years. Here's a snippet of that episode where Country shares an interaction that happened during a deer hunt that was jaw-dropping, to say the least.
Now, I had seen them just, 100, 200 yards, just stuff moving through the woods, nothing aggressive, nothing that I would be overly concerned about. We was still taking game, and when we was growing up, you brought game home every time you come in, or you may not got to eat that night some weeks. Just depends. It was tight. So we was deer hunting. I was sitting on the same fence line. Matter of fact, it was the very same tree stand. A deer had come down through there, and then another deer, just normal. And then finally the deer I wanted to shoot, nice 10-point, probably 130 inch. Back then in the early 90s, that was a big deer. Now it ain't so much, but I was glad to shoot it. And I shot it. I seen it fall 55, 75 yards down through there. I've seen it tip over. But about 5 minutes later, I also heard something walk where the thing had screamed at. And what it is, let me give you a little better picture. It's a great big bend in the creek. It makes a great big wide horseshoe in the creek there. And where it starts to swing back, there's probably 3.5 acres of river cane in there. And there's big tunnels. I always thought the pigs had done it because the pigs used it quite a bit too. After I got a little older, I learned not to go around the river cane so much. They like to hang out in there in the daytime. So that thing come out of the river cane. I didn't see it, but I could see my dad coming because he heard me shoot. He was 400 or 500 yards away, back on the other end of the horseshoe there, sitting on another bottleneck. He was walking down through there. He was pushing deer my way, hogs my way. I didn't shoot anything else. And he looked up at me and said, "Get it?" I said, "Yeah, I think something picked up, though." And he looked at, "Let's come on, we'll just go to the house." "Well, no, it's a big deer. We're gonna go see if we can't see it anyways, and maybe scare it. Maybe it'll drop it." Dad said, "No, it's not the best idea." I was pretty stubborn. I had a rifle in my hand. I thought I was tough. We pursued on several hundred yards, turned into about 3.5 miles. Once we got into the area, we crossed a big slough that the water treatment plant had made because the pipe leaked real bad. They've since destroyed that old water treatment plant and everything, but so it's dried up back in there now a little bit. But once we crossed that main creek that fed it into it, I knowed where it was going because that's where the coal mines and stuff was at. And we could see it 2 or 3 times, 75 yards, 110 yards, just depending on the brush down through there. It was open along the creek. Once you got 30, 40 yards off the creek, or the floodplain didn't clear it out every time it got up, it was much, much thicker. And it was traveling the edge of that. So the tracks was pretty easy most of the time in that bottomland. It was leaving tracks about 3.5 to 4 inches deep, where me and Dad was only leaving about 1/8 of an inch, just barely making marks. Considerably big. Dad said, "Man, we shouldn't be going after it. That's a big track. We got to do something." I said, "It's bull crap." I said, "Vernon can't even kill a deer because," I said, "they follow him around like crazy." And Dad said, "Yeah, well, it is what it is. It's just how you live with them. You just don't do nothing, and they don't do nothing." I said, "Yeah, we're doing something because he done something." We ended up tracking it up there, and we could hear multiple animals on this flat just below where this mine was at. I said, "I don't know, Dad. That's crazy." He said, man, he said, don't take your gun if you're going to walk up there. He says, make sure you let them know you're coming. So we haven't even crossed the creek yet, and a whistle goes out. So we've already been made. I just said, hey, that's my deer. And I heard, it sounded like a herd of elephants standing up and running up the deal. We could see a few of them going through the cedars and the oak and stuff. But there were several that didn't. So I went ahead and took a couple steps, and when I did, it stopped over the side, and when it roared, it literally moved the hair on my head and face. It was loud. I said, hey, that's my deer. And it looked at me again and roared, and it looked at Dad and seen the gun, and then it really roared. This thing, it was almost so much it made you nauseous because of the vibration on the inside of you, if that makes sense to you. It almost turned our stomachs. It was that loud. Of course, I'm shaking. I said, if that thing makes a move, just shoot it in the head, Dad. And of course, Dad, I don't know whether he heard me or not. I took 2 steps up and to where I could see up on the flat, and I pointed to the deer. And it looked at the deer, looked at me, snarled. I looked back at the deer. That's my deer. And I reached to go grab another limb, take a step up, and that shot and missed it about 1.5 inches. He looked at my dad and tapped its head like, damn, that was close. The thing had fear in its eyes. I said, mine. That's mine. I got to eat too. And it looked at me like it understood what I was wanting. And all I got was a leg. It stepped over there within about 2 steps. It was probably 12, 13 yards from him, but 2 steps or so. Bent over, tore the back leg off, and slung it right into my chest and set me right back into the creek. That's it. Take your leg, get your gun, let's go. And we were escorted out from the ridge line. They were making a point to show that to be seen up on that ridge line, and they followed us up to the high line that goes down off in there that we took in and out. And at that point, they stopped. And when we went up the hill, they turned around and went back down. And after that, it wasn't so much being harassed as it was every time we come to the woods, they were always there. It was, you just couldn't get away from them. I don't care where you went. They knew you was there. It was crazy. That's it. As long as they're not hurting you and not attacking, he said, just keep doing your deal. He said, they're just checking you out. And so that's what we did. And Dad said, I had one. It was the next year, that following February, after they took the deer. I was fishing the slough pond back there, catching channel cat on stink bait. It was cold. And I don't know, I had probably 25, 30 catfish. Nobody going to regulate a young man or how many fish he had. And I was just about getting ready to go. And I had another little old bite there, and I picked up the rod. And when I picked up the rod, a hand reached out of the brush because the brush was just cleared by beavers. It wasn't much, a couple of foot wide tops before you stepped into 8 to 20 foot tall saplings that were so thick that cottontails couldn't get in it. I never heard nothing. I never saw nothing. I never smelt nothing until the hand touched me on the shoulder and rolled me back. And he just picked my stringer up with 2 fingers, mind you, smiled real big, and walked off. Oh, crap. That sucks. That's a lot of work. I had a heck of a stringer of catfish. So I don't know nothing else to do. I just start catching fish. Dad told me to bring fish home. I still had plenty of time. I started catching more fish. I don't know, 10 or 11 more catfish, and I went to the house carrying them on sticks. I'd strung them up. That's what I had to use. As I come around the bend in this access road that come off from the old water treatment plant, there's my stringer hanging up in the tree. I strung up my fish and went on about my rat killing to the house. I told Dad. Dad said, don't tell Mom. He said, he probably shouldn't go catfishing for a while down there. He said, they might be tough for him right now. She said, they might just soon take you instead of the catfish. I said, well, he smiled when he took them, and he was real polite. Dad said, what do you mean he was polite? I said, he only used 2 fingers and held his pinky out like he was drinking a cup from an Englishman. He said, you're kidding. I said, nope. I said, he turned around and walked off. I said, and it wasn't the big guy. He says, oh. I said, so what was it, a female? I said, no, it was a male. That I know for sure because it was standing right over the top of me pretty much. He said, oh. He smiled at you. I said, he smiled. I said, there's a stringer. He gave me the stringer back. By the time I caught my fish and made it around, I told him the story, and he just Yeah, from this point on, just start leaving half of everything you take from the woods. So if you shoot 30 squirrels, 15 of it goes to them. And so that's what we started doing, or I started doing. And at this point in time, Dad he always told me he was chumming the creek, but I think he was taking the hog pellets down there and feeding the dang squatches. I really do.
It sounds like you got a really good look at the face of the Sasquatch at multiple times. Can you describe anything else
a lot
that
of you
saw?
guys get it. A lot of you guys get it so wrong. I've never seen anything that looked even remotely close to a gorilla. It's a freaking Neanderthal is what it is. That's what it is. It's a Neanderthal. I don't care if the bones tell you different. It's a big, giant Neanderthal. It looks just like a Neanderthal. It's a man. It's got a big bulbous nose. Some of them are flat. It's a Neanderthal. That's what it is. This big.
That is one of my favorite episodes. Country was just such a fun individual to talk to. And if you think that's a wild story, the episode gets even wilder. Let me know in the comments if I should catch back up with any of these individuals from these different snippets. Let's head on over to the next one. In clip number 8, we talked to a retired police officer about his standoff with a Bigfoot at his family cabin during a vacation in northern Michigan. It's one of our most listened to episodes. That may be because of the audio quality. Check out the comments on YouTube. But still, I love this story. It's an incredible look into what happens during a stressful situation such as a standoff, and when you put Bigfoot into the mix, things get even crazier. Enjoy. What time of day would you say that was where you went out to the outhouse, got rattled?
It was about 3:00.
Okay.
And between 3 and 3:15, because where we were, the clearing around the house was about a half acre was cleared, but it was patchy. So when that November sun is just about hitting the top of the trees, it's right about 3:00 on its way down. Because by 4:00, it would be that grayish dusk. And then by 5:00, done. You're dark because the sun's below the trees and you're all in shadow. You might looking straight up. You'd still have more, a little bit more light that you could see straight above you. But as far as illuminating the area, yeah, by 5:00, you're done. And it's one of those places where, other than artificial light from cabins or a flashlight, there's no street lights. It's dark. And unless you've experienced it, especially in those November days where it tends to be more overcast in northern Michigan, you can't see your hand in front of your face. That's how dark it is. It's that deep, almost cave-like dark. I almost felt the vibration in my chest.
Okay.
Like there was an actual sound hitting a wall. Have you ever been in a very tight quarters, so like a very small hallway or a basement, and been close to a wall, and you've spoken loudly and you feel that sound come back at you?
Sure. Yeah.
And actually, yeah, it felt like that, except it was a very open area. And it felt almost like the sound when it hit me was, say, an open-handed hand just pushing really lightly on my chest. But it was quick, but it was spread out. So it was like a big wave, but just someone were to give you like an open-handed push on your chest. And that's what it felt like. There was a distinct wave to it.
And see how that would be agitating for sure.
Yeah, but it was one of those things where I've had experiences before in my life, not in the woods, not anything outdoor related, but in professional context, where you're hypersensitive and hyper aware of everything that's going on around you because you're in fight or flight. You're in what would turn out to be either a dangerous situation with a predatory human, or you're clearing a building. You're just so focused on what is going on. And that's how I was sensing that, almost that sound. So it was outside of what I would consider to be an experience for there, but I've experienced similar feelings other places.
Sure.
Because at the cabin, I was always totally relaxed. Just, it was that one place where I could always go and decompress. I could get out to the lake and fish, take a walk in the woods, go after squirrel, whatever I wanted to do. And I never, ever felt like I needed to be vigilant for two-legged predator. There was anything that I wouldn't be able to handle with a loud get out of here or throwing a rock at something. It was a really peaceful place. Worked for a city department in Arizona. And so we had good vacation time. I had 3 weeks every year. After 5 years, because I worked so much overtime, we would get vacation time based on how many hours how much we'd worked. And back in those days, I didn't make a lot of money. I made a decent living for the area, but I worked a lot of overtime because I had just bought I bought a condo, so I had my own home, and I didn't want to be in a lot of debt. So I worked a lot of overtime. And so that 3 weeks was driving to Michigan, going to see my maternal grandparents. My dad's going to be up. My Uncle Mick will be up. The decompress from everything time.
Sure.
But I like that week by myself where I didn't have to talk to anybody if I didn't choose to, unless I drove into town, which I rarely did. I didn't have to. Occasionally, you might run into someone that was coming up to hunt, but that was pretty rare. Yeah, but yeah, it did. It ruined my vacation.
So it's around 3:30 in the afternoon. You're headed back into the cabin.
Yeah, definitely in the 3:00 hour.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went back into the cabin. As I remember, I started some dinner. But still at the same time, while I'm trying to make dinner, I'm like almost grumbling and cussing to myself. You know, those internal conversations where someone's messing with me and I'm durr. That Yosemite Sam cussing under your breath.
Yeah.
It was just irritating. I don't know any other way to describe it. It was just that. It's like when your kids are running wild but they're not doing anything wrong. And you want to cuss them out, but you don't because you're a good dad.
Sure.
But you go out in the garage and you cuss to yourself. That's what it felt like. Anyway, I went back in the cabin, started doing some dinner, and I had to go back outside, and I had to do some stand-up business. You go to the outhouse, you got to do a douche. You don't if you got to. So I go back outside, and about halfway between about, I don't know, 40 to 50 feet between the back porch and the outhouse, which faces out onto the swampy area it's not really swamp. It's wet all the time. We really have swamps in Michigan, but you just don't go back there unless you want your boots getting sucked off your feet with that really black, silty mud. But anyway, I'm going out, and from around the unexposed side of the outhouse and a tree, it stepped out. And I don't know why it stepped out. I don't know why it chose to come out and look at, but now I'm looking at it like right. I'm 6'4", and this thing had to have a foot on me, maybe a little bit more. And I think my best estimation when I looked at the tree that it was near, had to be 8 feet. And I was 10 yards away from it. Max, I was about 30 feet. And I even now, what's going back into that moment, I've been looking at this thing, and I'm tongue-tied now just talking about it. And it did it again, and then just woof. And this time I felt it almost just go through me. That oomph was so powerful. It just like a wave that just went right through my body. And all I'm thinking is just, what am I going to do? But then I didn't do anything. I just stood there, and I'm like, okay, don't run. And I think, honestly, that's really what I wanted to do. I was just like, all right, I'm going to run now. Like that that calm voice you get in your head where it has that totally stupid, really fast conversation with yourself.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm going to run down. No, that's not going to work because it can reach out and grab me. And it was just like, I felt like a cartoon moment with myself. So I just looked at it and I looked and it's looking back at me and now there were no whites to its eyes. And that was the really weird thing. And it's just, conical head, no neck, looked like if Arnold Schwarzenegger had a bigger brother who put on another 100 pounds. It was massive, the mass of this creature I could barely describe. And the long arms, the legs were like tree stumps. The hair on it was, even in like that fading light, like almost the tips of it were glistening. Not like sparkly, like you hear people talking about, but just a very natural hair sheen that you would see on like a new growth coat on your horses just before the fall, like very well groomed and very well kempt. Like it worked to keep itself clean. I don't know. That's that impression that I got in the moment, but it was huge. But the face was very human. The cheekbones were very pronounced. It had a flatter nose. It was wider, not really pronounced coming out from the face.
Believe it or not, the episode we just heard is the most listened to episode on the Bigfoot Society YouTube channel, so definitely go check it out. Coming up next, we have number 7. Chris is a retired law enforcement official that told of some very interesting things he experienced in the George Washington National Forest in Virginia. Listen as he shares what happened, and let me know in the comments what you think.
It was November. It was muzzleloader in Virginia, and I think it was 2019. And there is a hunting cabin I go to every year. My several family members and friends, we meet, and it's several acres surrounded by, to my understanding, a couple 100,000 acres of the George Washington National Forest in the state of Virginia. It's just really big woods, especially for the East Coast, big woods, and bordered by even more big woods, because where I'm at is pretty darn close to West Virginia, and West Virginia is pretty much the same way, just national forest after national forest. And this property has been in my family since 1970, and we go up every year and deer hunt. I go up for bow, and I try muzzleloader and rifle, or at least one of them. Was up there muzzleloader this year in 2019. We're getting up to hunt. It's pre-dawn. It's a real dark morning, probably an hour before the sun's supposed to come up. I walk out of the cabin. I go down to my side-by-side to get something out of it, and I'm getting ready to go to my ground blind. And I'm looking down. I'm about 40 yards from the cabin, and the front porch light is on the cabin, and that's it. Other than that, you can't see your hand in front of your face. It's just pitch black all around you. And I'm trying to grab something in my side-by-side without using my light, which was foolish. But while I'm doing that, my buddy is up on the porch, bent over, putting on his shoes. So you really can't see him, but he is under the light up on the porch, and the rest of them are inside the cabin, hadn't come out yet. On the other side of me, I hear from a reasonable distance away, very heavy footfalls, 2 feet, guaranteed. And this terrain is very rocky with a lot of leaf litter. There's rocks all over the place with leaf litter everywhere. But when I was healthy, if you try and just walk through there with no light or flashlight whatsoever, you're just going to go to the ground. And whatever was moving pretty fast, and it was going like it was going to go past the cabin, but it was angling towards me, getting a little closer because it was at a distance, then getting closer and closer, heavier and heavier. And just in that fresh leaf litter, just crunch, slam, crunch, bang, just two. And it was coming right at me. And I'm frozen. And I'm getting chills telling it right now. I'm frozen, and I wasn't having fun. And not a lot scares me to the point of kind of being dumb about it, but that scares me. And I look up and I can't not see my buddy because he's tying his shoes. And I'm trying to whisper his name, and the steps are still coming. Boom, boom, boom. Bipedal, heavy footfalls right through the hardwoods. And I finally am like, so-and-so, like the loudest whisper I could. He leans up and goes, what? Those steps stop dead in their tracks, and then it's like as fast, like that. But still bipedal, heavy footfall running away from me. I almost went right back in the cabin, took off all my stuff, and said, nope, I'm not going out. And I asked my buddy if he had heard that. He said, no, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't hear nothing. I said, all right. So I did go out. I went onto my ground blind. And I'm later on that day and into the evening, I'm talking to some other guys that were out there at the cabin with, and I told them what I heard. I said, I can tell you what I heard. I just can't tell you what made it. And they're laughing and joking. No, it was a deer. It was a bear. And I'm like, okay, But then one of my family members starts telling me we have our older relatives, the previous generation, they built wooden homemade ladder stands in certain locations throughout our property along the national forest. And they've been there for 25, 30 years. And they're like ratcheted into very large trees with 3 or 4 inch heavy big screws type stuff. They're not coming off. And anybody just meandering through wouldn't have the equipment. You know what I mean? Coincidentally, I'm in the middle of a national forest, but I have a battery operated Sawzall, or I've got the ratchets I need to take this thing off. And who wants a 30 plus year old warped tree stand that we actually don't even use anymore? But family member says, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you, I was down in the so-and-so area down there. I said, yeah. He said, the stand was gone. I said, what do you mean the stand was gone? He said, the ladder stand's gone. I said, the ladder stand can't be gone unless you went down there and removed it. And why would you do that? He said, no. I started looking around for it, and I found it about 40 yards away from the tree, ripped into pieces, just shredded. And I'm like, saw how those things were installed. I said, what do you think did that? And of course, you know where my head went. At this point, my head's there. And he's, I don't know, bear, I guess. I said, are you serious? You're going to say it was a bear? I said, I don't believe an black bear has the strength to rip a stand completely off a tree. Maybe it does, but I don't see how it's going to do it without hands to go up onto the stand or get high enough and wrap your hands around it. Because he said it was ripped off the tree, his words, and then drug and then ripped into pieces and pulled apart. I'm like, what? So that was crazy when he told me that. Of course, he said, yeah, it was a bear. And I'm like, are you sure? Yeah, I'm like, are you really sure it was a bear? I don't know, man. And then the subject was changed. But that also was up at the cabin. So I've had some really crazy things happen to me, crazy anyway. And again, you've got to be where I'm at in Virginia at the time. Other than another deer hunter, there's nobody around for a long way. It takes 4-wheel drive to get in there, and it's just a long way in the middle of nowhere. And if there's any other hunter close by, he's interested in getting to his stand just like me. And he's not going to go moving through those woods with no flashlight. It's not going to. I would challenge in those areas where I'm at, that live in those areas know what I'm talking about. You're just not going to go bearing off through there with nothing, no lights, no nothing. You're in the mountains, rocks all over the place, leaf litter covering the rocks. You just end up on the ground with a busted nose quick. But I would love to know what these things I'm hearing in the woods are, for sure.
Had some really interesting situations, Chris. If there's listeners that are familiar with these areas and they're like, that sounds like something that I experienced too, need to put it in the comments. Let us know. But so you've got this mind that has this background of law enforcement. I'm going to guess when this stuff is happening to you, you're heavily analyzing, or what kind of mindset are you in when there's this huge creature. It's coming towards you. I don't know how I would handle that, to be honest.
I have to say that I froze. I not like in a fear type way, but yeah, I was scared, but I just froze because I did not want it to see me. I knew it was never one moment in my mind that it was ever a human, period. Never. And from that, when I heard that, it's seconds of quickly trying to go through the process of elimination. That's not a couple of deer trotting my way. That's not a buck pushing a doe my way. That's not a deer at all. That's not anything small. That is heavy. That's big. It's breaking branches on the ground, and it's on 2 feet. That's not a bear. I've had bear come under my tree stand. You never hear a thing. And then sometimes they sound like a freight train going through the woods, I guess. It just depends. But my experiences with bear in the woods is they're very quiet. That's been my experiences. And this was just as it walking towards me, the process of elimination went pretty quick because it was pretty crystal clear what I was listening to. And then before I knew it, I'm, trying to get my buddy's attention, and then the thing took off fast. And it didn't go super far before it stopped dead in its tracks, I should say. It was like my mind, it ran heavy on 2 feet, but it probably didn't go 45, 50 yards and then stopped. It didn't. Like it was fading away, but I could still hear it clearly, and then it just stopped. And so after I'm talking to my friend, I was thinking, is it out there watching us right now? Never heard it run away, just get out of my range, and then it went quiet.
Moving on to number 6 is an episode that surprised me that it was so well received, but it's a very fun one to listen to. Jerry is a man of many skills. While digging for gold as an amateur gold miner in 1992, he experienced some Bigfoot-related things that still haunt him to this day. Let's listen in.
And just to show you, I'm not playing around. This is me at 24. And that was on Maxwell's Creek on Lake McClure in Northern California. I was a member of about a 5 or 6 man team. We were amateur gold miners. We spent a lot of time up in the backcountry. Because here's the deal. If you want to find gold, you can't pull over and just go pan for it. There's lots of gold out in those mountains, but you got to go back where nobody's been for at least 200-300 years, at least. Get back to where people haven't been. And so that's what we did a lot of. And I said all that to say this. I was in a place just east of Coulterville. If you look it up on the map, Coult, Coulterville, very old mining town. I was back in a place called Dogtown. If you look up on the USGS quadrangle of the Buckhorn quadrangle, you'll find Cat Town right there. It's an old mining settlement. Ruins are still there. But I was up there on my own, as I did a lot. We used to go back and scout places that we could mine, actively mine, placer mine, high bank. Now, this is probably about 7 miles back from Coulterville. It's quite a ways. Once you get to Cat Town, you park and you basically start working your way to the backside of Yosemite National Park. And in this area, there's a big canyon right there, the Tuolumne River, which comes out of Yosemite, runs right through that. That's one of the tributaries that feeds Maxwell's Creek. And I was back there, we called it dinking. And that just means go down the creek to see if you find any color. If we find really good color, we'll all come back and work that area. You have to forgive me, man. I'm back there. Now, at that time, again, about 24, I'm about 170 pounds. That's about a 45-pound rucksack that I always carried with me. So I'm camped out not too far from the canyon. I'm the only one back there. I know this for a fact. The logging road I took in used to be an old mining road. The Bondurant mine is off that road. It's a dead-end canyon road. It goes down by Rattlesnake Gulch, and it just dead ends right there. There's only one way in, one way out. And I'm in my tent, and I bedded down on some pine needles where the pine needles are thick. And you can find areas where the pine needles are just 6-8 inches thick. I bedded down there for the night, had this little old school Boy Scout style slip into it tent. And it's got, I don't know what time it was, man. It's got to be probably like 2-3 o'clock in the morning. It's definitely middle of the night. And I'm just going to say right now, I don't know what it was. Okay. but it was clearly on 2 feet. I know what I sound like at 170 plus 40 pounds on those pine needles. Whatever it was, way bigger than me. It woke me up. Now, the pine needles weren't all dry. That was springtime, so it's very, but I know what that sounds like. I know what other things sound like in those woods. And whatever it was, it came in from like the area of the road, and it walked around my tent like 3 times. And I was laying there. I used to have a Colt Pioneer 22 long rifle, a caliber pistol. It's what I carried with me back in those days. I've had encounters with mountain lions and black bears and shit back there. So I always carried something I could scare them off with. I never carried heavy weapons back then. And I'm laying there with this pistol on my chest and my thumbs on the hammer. And I'm thinking, if that zipper moves, I'm going to fan off 5 shots. It scared the living shit out of me. And the weirdest part of that whole deal is I heard it walk away. And as it cleared this little clearing I was in with the pine needles, it got off into the bush, and it was making a little bit more noise. It was very quiet. It was trying to be quiet, you could tell. But the weird part was it didn't walk like back toward the road, back where civilization's back that way. No, it walked toward the canyon, toward the backside of Yosemite. And that freaked me. I'm trying not to cuss, man. It freaked me the hell out. And at some point, I finally fell asleep. As soon as the sun popped over that saddle, I was like, I'm out of here. And now here's the deal, man. Bigfoot's a guy in a monkey suit. That's what I was told. That's what I knew. Bob Hieronymus and the whole deal. And yeah. So back then, as a recreational gold miner, I'm thinking this has got to be a claim jumper. It's got to be a tweaker, something. It's got to be something. It scared me enough that be like going through my 24-year-old mind. I'm like, who the hell is out here at this hour of the morning, walking around my tent and then walking that way? That's nuts. I never could figure that out. And over time, so I packed up that morning, obviously, and got the hell out of there. I told Paul about it, and he was like, oh, it must have been a claim jumper or something. And I'm going, dude, no, this was a big ass claim jumper if it was a claim jumper. Because that shit still goes on back there. There's still plenty of gold back in those hills. And there's people that will rob you. And there ain't nothing you can do about it back there.
In clip number 5, Brian Garvey goes hiking New Hampshire mountains with his dog Chewy. In this episode, Brian shares the incredibly intense encounters he's had with Bigfoot over the years in that environment. It's not one to miss.
We were going to spend 2 nights, 3 days at a campsite in Glen, New Hampshire. Now, Glen, New Hampshire is in northern New Hampshire. It's right past the presidential range, Mount Washington. So first night went great. Spent the whole next day at the park. Came back to that day tired. Set up the camp, had the campfire going, and they went to bed early because it was a long day. I stayed up till it was time to go to bed. You have to put the campfire out at a certain time. So around 10 o'clock, I put the campfire out, went to bed. Now, for me, and still to this day, when I hike and do overnights, I have issues falling asleep in a tent. I can't sleep on my back. I am constantly a tosser and a turner. I know, like when I go on these big hikes, I know I'm not going to sleep. I'm just going to toss and turn, and I suffer. I'll suffer, but I'll suffer because of my love for the mountains. Like I will get up and I'll hike the next morning. So that night, I'm just laying in the tent. And it was hours I was laying there, and I'm getting mad. I'm getting aggravated because I know the next day, like we have this big drive coming up, like a 4-hour drive home. And I'm like, I gotta go to sleep. Now, the campsite, like the campground we had, it was right on the bend of this brook. And it was probably like 9-10 feet wide where we were, the brook, and it was fast flowing water. So, it was something you could rock hop across because there were boulders, but it was nothing I didn't want my son to get next to because of the, for his age and the way the water was moving. I'm like, you can't go next to this because on the other side was just wilderness. So we were right on the edge of where the campground ended. So that night, I'm listening. I'm laying there. I'm listening to the water. I'm listening to all the crickets. You hear like little mice the little mice going through the leaves, I'm listening to that. And I'm like, I have to go to sleep. So I'm just laying there on my back, looking up. All of a sudden, I hear this impression start going across the tent. Now, at first, like when I heard it, it scared me. It scared the crap out of me because I'm like, who is this jerk messing with me and my family in the middle of the night? I thought it was, I'm thinking it's a person just messing with us, like a drunk camper messing with me, putting his hand across my tent. So, you know how nylon is loud a tent is loud when you rub against it. And that's what startled me. But I was able to pick up the impression of the hand, probably by the door of the tent. Now, this tent was a big tent. It was like an 8-person tent. It's one you could stand up and walk around in. So we had all our stuff on one side of the tent. I was in the middle. It was my girlfriend and my son on the end of the tent. So my feet were at the door of the tent. So when I saw the impression above the tent, because I could see, I could see the digits going across. And I'm like, I go up on my elbows and I'm watching. I'm about to get up. I'm about to get up and I'm about to open the tent. I'm going to see, who is this jerk messing with me? Who is this jerk trying to scare me in the middle of the night? So as it made it across the tent, I'm going to unzip my sleeping bag. And as soon as I start to do that, I hear a growl. I hear this growl. It was the deepest growl I have ever heard. I have ever heard in my life. It went from a growl, a guttural growl, to a grunt. And when it did that grunt, man, my earlobes vibrated. Like, it vibrated my body to where I dropped right back down. I dropped right back down. I put the friggin' pillow over my head. And I was so confused. I went from being angry and mad to want to confront this person to be like, after I heard that grunt, I'm like, that's not a person. A person cannot do what I heard. And it was with such ease. It went from I heard the breath to the growl to the grunt. So it was just seconds. You know what I mean? It was just seconds. But I was so confused. I was confused. I was scared. And I fell right back down. I put the pillow over my head and I waited. I was so scared because I didn't know what could do that. So my first motion was like, I'm going to turn and I'm going to see if it woke up my girlfriend. And they are heavy sleepers. They were sound asleep. Now, people ask me, like, well, was it loud? And it wasn't it wasn't a scream. It was just a very deep guttural growl to a grunt. And it blew my mind that it could vibrate me like that, because that's never happened to me before. The closest thing I could compare it to is going to a concert. You get to that front row in front of a speaker, and you got that guy on the bass, and it's rattling through you. That's the closest I can tell someone what that feels like. And after that happened, like I told you, I was listening to the crickets. I was listening to all the little animals. After that grunt, after that vibration, it went dead silent. There were no crickets. It was dead silent where I couldn't move. And I don't know if I couldn't move from the fear or if it was from that rattle in my chest, that vibration. It was something that it confused me so much. They stayed sound asleep. They were sound asleep. Now, after that all happened and it went silent, I just laid there. I laid there and I couldn't move. I didn't want to move. I didn't want whatever it was. I didn't want it to know I was up. I didn't want it to come back. I'm thinking of the direction it was going. It was going in the direction, and if it came back, my son was on the end of that tent. I'm thinking about that. This is all running through my head. I'm thinking about, I don't want this thing coming back. I'm trying to think of animals. What animals could do that? Because that's my first instinct. Bigfoot was not even in my mind. It was nothing I thought about at the time. It wasn't even a thought. I'm like, if there's one in the Pacific Northwest, that's what I thought. It blew my mind. It blew my mind to where I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel safe till it started getting light out. And I finally was like I finally had that sense of relief, like the birds started chirping, and I finally felt safe. I'm like, whatever animal that was is definitely gone by now, because it's been hours. It was hours I was laying there. And I remember that morning, I was so close to saying something to my girlfriend, but I didn't want her to say, oh, it was just a person, because it wasn't a person. A person cannot do what I felt with that vocal. There's no way. It was an effortless grunt, and it was it was so deep. So I remember after that, like I got out, I went outside the tent that morning. Now I'm on no sleep. I didn't know what to look around for. I wasn't sure, but we were rookie campers. My coolers were out. Like everything was out. Our marshmallow sticks, didn't touch it. Nothing was touched. Nothing was moved. And I was so confused. Like I'm even looking on the ground we were on. It was a hard gravelly kind of hard dirt, hard gravel. I looked around for I first thought bear, because I couldn't think of any other big animal in New Hampshire that could do what happened. And then I'm starting to think about it. I'm like, a bear is not going to stand up on its hind legs, run its paw across my tent, right? Without putting a friggin' hole in it with its claws. Like it baffled me. I'm like, there's no way a bear is going to make that vibration. Like I've never heard of a bear doing that. And it bothered me. The whole ride home, I was just so close to just saying something. I kept it to myself. Now, I kept this to myself for 18 years. I told nobody.
That episode, I believe, takes the record for the longest Bigfoot Society episode ever. You'll have to check it out. In clip number 4, Jim Whitehead, Bigfoot researcher from Western Oklahoma, shares about a night encounter that terrified him. Much of the information in Jim's episode has only been shared on the Bigfoot Society podcast, and I really recommend you check this episode out.
The most terrifying night of my life. See, my old farmhouse, the area I was researching at, was less than a half mile from my farmhouse. And had a good friend of mine that had been staying with me after a nasty divorce and getting back on his feet. And he finally moved out. And at the time, I went up to an area that I referred to as the marker area, because you go up there, it's like a little isolated pocket of woods connected by streams to bigger chunks of woods, but it's up on the top of the hill, and there's a pond and the hidden spring up there. And you go up there, and there's all kinds of crazy stuff going on with the trees, all kinds of possible structures and whatnot. And I'm pretty skeptical on stick structures, but when you find a tree as a green sapling that's been wrapped around another tree and tied in a knot, that's hard to explain. So I went up there, and that place tends to give me the creeps. And I went up in there, and basically I was checking the markers, looking for footprints, that kind of thing. And it didn't dawn on me, there was no sound. There was no birds, no bugs, nothing was rustling around in the leaves. And it really should have sunk in that means something was probably there. So I'm in there looking around, and I hear a crack. And I turn around, and I get this it'd be a good piece of firewood. It's probably about maybe 1.5 long and probably about 3-4 inches thick, comes sailing in my direction. Now, looking back, it probably didn't intend to hit me. I fell on my butt and it missed, and I thought it was aiming at me, and I started hightailing it out of there. Turned around in time to see a big silhouette backing back down the dam at the pond at the entryway to this place. And I went back to my house. Again, this is only a half mile away. And my buddy who was staying out there showed up to get some stuff, and he seen I was pretty spooked. And I told him what happened, and he asked me if I wanted him to stay. And I said, nah, you can go back. You got stuff you got to do. I'll be all right. It wasn't 10, 15 minutes after he left, I actually was talking to some of the other researchers when all of a sudden my dogs went absolutely berserk. They were going nuts barking, and then they were gone. The dogs left. And I went out there and looked around, and I had a rock hit the security light. Looking back, it dawned on me that these things had waited. Number one, they knew exactly where to find me at, because again, it's only a half mile away. So they knew where my house was. And then they waited until my buddy left. They waited for me to be alone. And I went back in the house. I was getting all excited. I'm turning off the lights, and I've got a night vision scope, and I'm running from window to window looking out. And the well house is out by the creek. The pressure switch was malfunctioning, and it was making this loud clicking noise. And through the night vision, I see a dark silhouette of what looks like an ape on all fours come up. And it reaches up and grabs the door on the well house and proceeds to pull the door off. And it was checking out the source of that noise, because it was a really loud noise coming from that pressure switch. So I get excited. I'm talking on the forums, and I do want to add, the MABRC had a team in eastern Oklahoma up near Salisaw. And at that same time I'm talking to them, they're getting rocks thrown at them. Then over in Georgia, we had another expedition going on that night, and the Georgia team had been roared at, and I think they got a bluff charge. So all three of this is happening at the same time, 3 different locations. And we were talking back and forth, and I've got the night vision. I'm looking out the window, and I see the little ape looking thing come back, and then there's a second one with it. Then all of a sudden, this huge dark mass follows them. And that well house is about 8 feet tall, and whatever it was taller. And I am certain it's probably the same one that I saw across the road in 2009, about a year later. This thing, and the people that I was actually talking with the head of the group, and he heard me go from excited to terrified in one go, because this thing was massive. And they went around there, left, and throughout the night, they came back several more times. And I got the feeling that it might have been some kind of show of strength or something. Don't quote me on that. That's pure speculation on my part, but I definitely seem to have got their interest. And when the sun was starting to come up, I hadn't slept. I was basically too worked up to sleep. And I sat down on the couch in the living room, which there's a door in the kitchen, which you can see from the living room. And I turned on the TV. I just turned it on to have background noise. didn't know at the time what was on. But you ever have something happen and your brain takes a snapshot that's permanently etched into your brain? That's how I know that Raiders of the Lost Ark was on. Because as I'm sitting there, I see movement out the kitchen window in the pre-dawn hours. And I look to the kitchen window, and a face pops up in the window looking at me. And I had a loaded shotgun beside me. Right after the big one showed up, I proceeded to load the firearms just in case. And I looked over at the shotgun, then looked at it, and then looked back at the shotgun. And its eyes got about as big around as saucers. It proceeded to disappear. The following night, I heard all kinds of howls and stuff coming from up in the hills, and we had another researcher who was visiting his dad, and he showed up. And I think he thought that I was making the whole thing up and everything. We went up to the marker area, and we started to come back down. And I was sitting there thinking that, okay, I got to do something because this guy thinks I'm full of crap. So I said, I'll tell you what, we'll go up and look at the markers. You can see those for yourself. And we went back up in there, and we got met at the tree line by a dark silhouette about 6-7 feet tall. Actually, it was about 7 something because I went back and measured the next day. And it had red eye shine, and it proceeded to duck under a branch and start walking in our direction. And this wasn't a bluff charge. These were almost Jason Voorhees Friday the 13th strides. Needless to say, we got out of there real fast. And that researcher, he'd go on to say that he doesn't think he's ever been as close to one as he was that night. But we got out of there. We went back down there to the bottoms. And something else of interest, my mother and my stepdad had showed up because they had talked to me and saw how scared I was the night before. And before we had went up there, Rob had played the Ohio House, the famous house, and my dog started looking around nervously. And my mother actually pointed out to him that we hear that all the time down there. We hear's a little more higher pitched, but yeah, basically, usually late at night or something. And she thought it was some kind of alarm somebody put up in a pasture or something that would go off on occasion.
In clip number 3, I talked to Roger Williams from the Squatch and Holler YouTube channel about a hunting trip that he and his son had in Marshall County, Tennessee. What they experienced there will surprise you.
Probably 3 years ago, my son, he has some family in the south end of the county, even further south than here. And we are 25 minutes from the Alabama border. So we're, I've heard a lot of stuff come out of North Alabama, Northeast, especially in the hills. I hadn't hunted in years, and he was like, Dad, my uncle's going to let us hunt, and he said you could come too. I'm like, oh, okay. And it was more or less, I went as just to have an experience with him, and I thought, look, I won't, I'll carry a rifle with me. I won't be hunting. I'll just be there, and we'll carry walkies with us. And so it was 2 weeks before the season. And I'm like, do you know anything about the place? He said, well, not really. I said, well, we kind of need to go scout a little bit. So, and Bigfoot's the farthest thing from my mind. We go up there, we find the water sources, we find the food, we find the fences, the holes in the fences where they travel, and we're just having a big time walking. And we're not being that quiet because we're just scouting. And we get to a particular point, and I see a tree about 5.5 foot up, and it's a hardwood. Because when whatever snapped it, it splintered. I mean, just like a high pressure snap, Being me, and I've always taught him to question and look for the answers, don't assume. So I'm looking around, and I don't see anything that fell on it. I don't see anything. At that time, the top was still there, kind of attached. And I'm looking around. I'm like, you know what? I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, I've seen some of these shows that say this is a marker. Could be a marker. And don't go past it, whatever. Maybe it was Les Stroud and, those guys. But I wasn't thinking Bigfoot. But it was odd, very odd, and no reason for it, okay? So I had my phone in my pocket, my shirt pocket. I stepped past this tree, and this all happened at the same time. So Siri
which I'm scared to say it. She might wake up here on my phone. Triggered, and my voice is the only thing that's supposed to trigger that. And Siri said, I don't quite understand. And I looked down in my pocket and I grabbed the phone. Well, as I'm grabbing the phone, about the size of your double fist, a rock comes over the cedar, up the hill, over the cedar thicket. They're not very high. And lands, I'm going to say 12 to 15 yards from us. Bounces down, and I hear it to my right. My son's looking at it. I hear it. I look up. I see the rock slowing down. But it was so much to take in. All of a sudden, now I've got my son out here, and we just had a rock thrown at us. And there's nobody out there. And you know something that throws rock has to have a thumb or two, has to have a hand. So I didn't react right away. What I was doing, I was thinking, what is our best action here? Because, any wild animal, you don't want to run. You don't want to trigger a response, to get attacked or whatever. So I'm thinking, what's the best thing we need to do? Well, my son, he's so funny. The first thing out of his mouth, he said, are we just going to ignore that we had a rock tossed at us? I'm like, no, Peyton, just calm down. Just hold on. I'm trying to figure out what we need to do. I said, so here's what we need to do. We need to walk down the hill backwards so we're facing whatever this is. And don't look up in there. Let's get away and we'll talk about this. And so we went back to the truck and we're like, what just happened? And so we started talking about the marker. I said, the tree, it was right there at the tree. And he said, what was up with Siri? I said, that's never happened before. So my question, hearing people talk about infrasound and all this, could infrasound trigger Siri? Because I've had that feeling, I've seen people where they go with the line and they measure the infrasound and they're like, oh, do you feel anything? And they're jittery and whatever. And so that's my first question was like, neither one of us said a word. So that's not supposed to happen. Second of all, we got the marker and then we got the rock toss. The Siri by itself wouldn't have been a big deal. The tree by itself wouldn't have been a big deal. But put together with the rock toss, it became very big deal. And, it scared me but we didn't feel threatened though. That's what we talked about. We didn't feel threatened. We talked about, should we go back? And we did. We went in before daylight. We had put him up a stand. In a few days after that, and where I hunt is not 200 to 250 yards from that spot. Where he hunts is over the ridge. It's not 150 yards. And like I said, we've never felt threatened there. And there have been times, one morning I was there, the breeze was blowing. It was from up the hill. I don't know what direction actually that is. But, you pay attention to it as a hunter. Okay, well, we got the breeze coming this way. I knew that Peyton was good and that I was good anything, up the hill. And I'm sitting there. I've been sitting there for 45 minutes. It hasn't started breaking daylight yet, but it's getting close. So fresh air, nice morning. I'm close to the spring, a water source. And I'm actually sitting blind on the ground, which I don't like doing that, but I was kind of backed up into a bank with some trees and stuff. So I felt like I had that spot covered, keep something from walking up on me. Well, I get a whiff of the only thing it did smell like a wet dog, but it had an element like death, decay. No, let's decay. Wet dog with decay, right? And I perked up. It's behind me, and that's where the wind was blowing. There's just a light breeze. Maybe 3 seconds. It was quick. But here's the thing. So, I've smelt dead animals, but if you do and the wind's blowing to you, you're going to keep smelling it. Right. So I'm like, this thing is moving. Whatever this is, it's moving. And I got on the walkie and I'm like, Peyton, I'm not trying to scare you. We've got something coming in between us that stinks like something I've never, actually smelled before. And it's moving. I think it's coming to you. Well, he never got a whiff of it, which is even more strange. And we have smelt this on more than one occasion, and he's got a whiff of it a couple of times, but like we've never felt threatened. And he's had some strange things, some sounds. He was by himself one day, and I got a text. I check up on him quite a bit because it's in the middle of nowhere. And he's 25, so he can take care of himself, but you just don't. It's not smart to hunt by yourself. But as long as he checks up with me ever so often, and let me know when you're leaving and all that. He said, Daddy, I just heard what sounded like a monkey. He said it was the build up, ooh, 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 and then a kind of a yell. He said it wasn't a scream, and it was the direction it came from was over the same direction as the marker and the rock throw, but even farther over on the other side of the hill. And he said, at first I thought it was a bull. He said, but on the beginning of it, but as it followed through with it, he said it wasn't.
In clip number 2, I talked to Robert, who shares about a story he heard from the state of Oklahoma. It's one of my favorite encounter stories that I've ever heard. It is intense. It's a great episode. Robert shares about things he's encountered in Arkansas and Oklahoma. And the face-to-face encounters are just fantastic. So make sure that you check out episode with Robert. It'll make you think twice about going into the Oklahoma woods.
Okay, it's the Washitas and the Kiamishi. I'm on the Kiamishi side. Okay, the Kiamishis run into Atoka. Okay, Atoka Reservoir, just north of the Atoka Reservoir. That's North Boggy Creek, and then Boggy Creek runs out 43 there, all the way back to Sardis Lake into the other area that I told you about that was on the other side of this specific area.
Wow.
So 43 runs through Stringtown out of Atoka. You go through Atoka, you're going south. You take Stringtown over on 43. 43 will take you all the way back out to Sardis Lake. So in between 43 and Highway 3 sits McGee Creek. Okay. And from there to Arkansas, it's just woods, man. It's the Kiamishis run into the Washitas run into the Winding Stairs run into the Blues run into Queen Wilhelmina, and then the Podo Mountain Range, and then from there it's the Bostons and the Ozarks. All it is woods, man.
Robert, have you ever heard of?
I know exactly where it is.
Yeah,
I have a few friends that are interested in this.
Stop.
In this thing, yeah. I've talked to a few people about this. Yeah, it's very prevalent where I grew up. Okay, it's hey, that's a bear. We know they're there. There's a bear in that area. Every single person there goes, yeah, there's Sasquatch out there. I mean, you can just randomly ask somebody, like, you believe in Sasquatch? Absolutely.
Yeah.
They'll just tell you. Like, it's not a conspiracy theory. I'll tell you that. We're all out of those, by the way.
Right.
There are no more conspiracy theories. It's all out in the open. Okay. And one of the gentlemen that he told me a story, and we actually just bumped into each other at and we started talking, and he told me a story. He went out and he had wanted to kill some hogs, and he set up on a trail. And I'm just gonna tell you this story real quick, okay?
Oh yeah, go for it, please.
And
Okay, so and this is his story, not mine. And let me tell you, I believe this guy 100%. He has no reason to lie. He goes to church on Sunday and Wednesday. I promise you, this guy has no reason to lie about this. It freaked him out terribly, to the point where he won't go back out there. He will not go back out. He's like, I will never go hunt out there again. No. Well, here's his story. He's sitting in his tree stand, and the trail comes down off the hill, and comes down into the gully. And he sees a bunch of hog coming this way. And he's like, all right, I'm about to get me some. And he decides to something takes his eye down into the gully off to his right. He sees movement. So he starts to look down there thinking that he's going to see more hogs. He does not. He sees two very large critters on all fours. And then they stand up. And then they start moving from tree to tree to tree towards the hogs. Once again, the hogs start coming down the hill. And once again, the biggest one, the one in front, goes back to all fours and takes off immediately on all fours, by the way, not on 2 feet, on all fours towards the hog. And what happens next is what scared the crap out of him, because it came off of all fours, hit the hog with 2 hands, breaking its back, grabbed it by the hind legs, swung it over to the tree and smashed his head on the tree and slung it over its shoulder and looked right at him in his tree stand.
Shut up.
And just walked off. He said that hog was 300 pounds, no problem. At least 250 to 300 pounds. He said it took 2 hands to smash that hog, and then he finished it off by swirling it around and smashing his head against the tree.
Again, check that episode out. It is wild. We're down to number 1. And number 1 in our listener downloaded episodes of 2023, this is on the audio podcast side, I'm going to share a clip from an episode I did with William or Bill Morris from Southwest Oregon. Listen along with me as I share what happened when Bill found a Sasquatch killed bear. It took me by surprise, and I'm sure it'll take you by surprise as well.
I actually have a Sasquatch killed bear sitting out here in my shed. The back legs were tucked up inside of the rib cage.
Wait, can you repeat that?
I have a Sasquatch killed bear.
Okay.
The neck is wrung like a wrung out washcloth. The skull and everything's still in there. All the paws were pinched off, at least the front two. The head still encased in the skin, all twisted up. And the back paws were still attached to the skin, but not in the body. Yeah. Yeah, it'll blow your mind.
Okay.
I said there's only a couple people that know about this. Now you all know about it.
Well, that's fine because no one listens to this.
Okay, we're safe.
Wink. Explain to me so did you find a dead bear, or?
I was on my way back from visiting my grandchildren. So I took the back roads, and which, because I hate taking the freeway. I hate taking the same way. It's just boring. And I was like, no, you're not going to stop by your area. No, you're going by it. No, you're not going to stop by it. Oh, yeah, you are. You're going to stop by your area and go check on it. So I get up this one area, and it's the spot between where you turn off on the cutoff road at the base of the area to the spring. And I call it their dining room or the kitchen after I found the bear. But I pulled up there, and there's this arch tree that's right there, and that's where I leave my offerings, is on that tree. But what I hate to leave there is because it's very visible from the roadway, so anybody could go up and just destroy whatever I've got there. So I've learned to go to the back of one of the trees close to that and tack like a bag on with some tacks and put fruit and garlic and tangerines. That's what I left last week. And but I took pictures of this the first day I found it, and there was just a very, very minuscule layer of meat on the ribs that I could see, and a little bit back on the pelvic area. And you can see the gray because the meat, you know, after about 24 hours, it's going to turn gray, especially if it's really thin, any meat that's left out. And it was like the meat had been stripped off just right down just before that tough layer, you know, that you get in the ribs. You know, the piece that we're always gnawing on and pulling, you know, I don't think it's digestible, but we eat it anyways. At least I do. I'm a carnivore. I'm sorry. I love ribs. but it had that gray layer of meat on there. I was like, wow, this is fresh. I didn't know what it was because it's straight down a bank, you know, and it's like, I'm not getting myself hurt going down there. And I was just in there just to check on the area anyhow, but that's what I discovered. So I took pictures of it that very day. So I have those pictures to compare it to when I actually got the carcass. And the cool part is, and I think they knew I was going to ask for this bear, is through one of the vertebrae of the neck was a stick stuck through the vertebrae. It didn't fall that way because it's like, you know, let me get on here. It's hard to get the camera. It takes a minute. It was like this far through the vertebrae. So if it fell, it shot right through this neck bone because it wouldn't go down this way. It had to be stuck through the vertebrae. And then another stick. And guess what I had at the neck? An X. And sorry, folks, I got to tell you, one thing I really want to express to you and drive home as an X does not mean keep out when it comes to Sasquatches. Remember, they're very similar to us, but they're not us. And their language is different than ours, but I am finding that all the X's that I find are a welcome sign. They're actually welcoming you to the area. They know you're coming. And if you recognize that, it was meant for you. It was absolutely meant and put there for you. And so those are the places, if you want to go squatching, that's where you start. That's where you want to go. But there was an X at the neck because they already knew I was going to take it. They already knew I was going to ask, and I asked them permission for it. You know, I asked for, just like when I took the photographs of the female, I asked permission. And I explained like I needed to. She already knew what they were, knew what a photograph. You can't hide anything from them. And don't try. It's not worth it. And I'm armed. They don't mind me being armed. And the reason why is because they know it's not for them. And I have no intention of ever firing at them and just piss them off. You know, it'd be like, you know, like me getting hit with a BB is like, now I'm mad. But I wasn't able to go up to the area for a while. So I came back in 7 weeks, Jeremiah. It had not been touched. That does not happen in nature.
That's weird, man.
That does not happen. When a deer or anything, you find a roadkill, go back a week later, tell me what's left of it.
Yeah.
Tell me what's left of it. Find pieces of it. You might find a few pieces here, maybe a rib bone here, maybe a leg bone over here, but 99% of it's going to be gone. The forest tends to clean up after itself.
Yep.
We have the first stage. You're looking at ravens and turkey vultures. They go in, they take whatever they can of any meat and sinews that are left, and you know any cartilages, and they've removed that. And that's what got my attention the second time of going up there and finding the carcasses. I came upon, and I'm looking at feathers. Turkey vultures were there, and they're kind of have always been one of my spirit guides because we're the ones that clean up the messes. And that's always kind of been my forte is, and you know, when it hits the fan, I'm the one that helps make everything okay and figure everything out and stay calm and clear everything up. And so I'm picking up feathers, and I look down, that carcass is still there, and it's untouched. There is not one. The only marks that were on it was from the turkey vulture picking at the joints and stuff and pulling some of the sinews up. I have the whole thing intact. There's been a couple rib bones fall off.
That's just a little snippet of how wild that episode gets. I'd like to thank all of the Bigfoot Society listeners for listening to the channel, being subscribers, being involved, sharing your stories, allowing me to hear them so that I can share them with the rest of the listeners and it can help them out as well. But before I let you all go, I want to share a bonus clip. This is a clip from my current favorite episode I've ever recorded. This individual from Rainier, Oregon, who shares what happened when his family was tormented by Sasquatch for 4 years. If you've never heard this episode, you owe it to yourself to listen immediately after this. Share this episode with a friend who hasn't listened to Bigfoot Society yet. It's a great introduction to a lot of really good episodes. And if you want to hear any of the episodes that go along with these clips, go over to the show notes and I'll have the links to all the episodes by order in the show notes.
Okay, that'd be great. Well, we came to Rainier, Oregon from Southern California as my dad was a pipe fitter. He was hired on to the Trojan nuclear plant as it was being built. And I'm one of many kids and boys and girls, and I was the youngest. And Dad bought this land. And when we first got there, we moved into this just horrible single wide trailer until we can get a brand new one there. And right off the bat, some very odd things were occurring. We thought it was just the neighbors coming over, but it wasn't. To be blunt, these animals, or whatever they are, whatever you choose to call them, they're as real as the vehicles driving down the road. That being said, they had a nasty habit at first of just looking through our windows and scaring mostly all my sisters, all the girls, and my mother. And they would scream and run from the room, and Dad would always run out the door, and he would hardly ever see anything, but he would hear loud footsteps as if you were dragging a engine block through the woods, so to speak. We all started to get pretty good looks at him here and there, and in the daytime and the nighttime. And it was obvious as we cleaned the single wide up, the outside of it, that these animals were pounding on this trailer, and it was just pounded. And we slowly understood what was occurring. They didn't do anything aggressive at first. They were just curious of what was going on. It was obvious to a plowboy that nobody had lived in this trailer for quite some time, years possibly. We knew that there was 4. We knew that there was 4 because we all seen all 4 of them at the same time, many times, mostly in the daytime. There was obviously a large, and you'll excuse the cliche, there was a large male. And well, saying large is kind of a understatement. There was a smaller female. She was more boxy, chubby kind of shaped. And then 2 younger ones that were almost identical. One was a little brown, one was a little cinnamon red. And they were almost identical in height. So the mom and dad had to rationalize this. They were lying to us children. They had to become professional liars to their children by saying, oh, these things are just like monkeys. They're monkeys. Because we came from California and we'd often go to the San Diego Zoo, once a year kind of thing. They did not want their children frightened. We thought, okay, they're monkeys, so we wouldn't be afraid. So in time, we had a new double wide put in above where we were at and cleared off a bunch of land. And Dad had hired a company to come in and start cutting down trees that were enormous within themselves. They're, the kind of logs you'd only be able to put 2 or 3 on a logging truck. And that's when things changed quite a bit. They would just come out and stand there away from the tree line by a few feet. They were quite unafraid, all 4 of them. They would stand most of the time motionless. They had no fear of us whatsoever, at least to us, the family. Everybody was hassled. And when I say everybody, let me qualify that. The timber fallers that Dad hired, they were being hassled and they were being scared off by these things. The people that we bought the land from, a very elderly couple named Belle and Al, they still lived on the property in the old shack, they were being harassed. And so slowly over months and months, things would uptick. So what Dad thought he would do is let people at the time who was working around him, he would let the men live in the single wide that we did, stay in there for one reason. Dad said, I'm not going to charge you any money to stay there, because at the time it was super hard to find a place to live there. These things were on the property. You can make a reasonable effort to air them out in any way that you see fit, and you're good. And so they did. I was always instructed to stay away from them. And it just got really bad, especially for the girls. For some reason, the male and female, they were just, they couldn't, it's like their curiosity got the best of them. And the girls, of course, would use high-pitched voices because we were young. And the girls were just frightened of absolutely everything. My older brother, he was the oldest, and I was the youngest. We were told things a little bit differently. Dad, of course, being this 5-foot-tall pipe fitter that resembled Yosemite Sam, also a Marine in the Korean War era, was no joke. You didn't mess with this guy, and you're not going to tell him what to do, but a very decent man. And he'd look at my brother and I and say, these things are a threat. I don't want you to grab a rifle and go after them, because that's what they probably want. And we never did. But the men in the trailer started to seek these things out to fulfill their obligations, so to speak. And it just got worse. I think that was kind of a mistake on Dad's part. This is a span over 4 years. At least it was for my brother, my dad, and myself. Now, after 2 years, all my sisters, including my mother, who was a heart patient and not to be startled, they had had enough. These were not the girls that we remember when we moved there. You could never get any sleep. They're always scared. They changed. And Dad was, of course, concerned. More than concerned. He was, scared for all the girls. Every once in a while, one of the girls or both of the girls or all four of them, for that fact, would run in the house screaming, and that's not good. And the nerves would be high for a couple of days. But then a few days later, something else would happen. The girls would get scared again. So, and this went on for a couple of years. And Dad finally sent the girls away to Kennewick, Washington. And the day after Dad had sent the girls away, he got the men from the trailer down there and us two boys and informed everybody, the girls are gone. I want these things aired out. All bets are off. It's funny. People think just turn on all your lights and they'll go away. That's not exactly true. They don't care about the light. They don't care because often you would see them in a light, like an old farm light in your driveway that you would have, and they'd be standing just a few feet away from it, either staring at the house most of the time or off at one of the other animals, creatures. So that's not, people think turn on the lights and they'll go. No, they're not going to go away. They're not afraid. So they tried a lot of different things to actually lure these animals in, and not a darn thing worked to lure them in. They tried to bait them or whatever. They just wanted to get a shot at them. And, let me describe the animals. The large male, I remember this Boilermaker. He was a Boilermaker. And these are all savvy men. He had said the male was at least 10 feet tall and a little under 1,000 pounds. And he never qualified how he knew that. But you look at these group of men, they knew that. These were old school, very tough, all go, no stop, hunting almost year-round kind of men. And the female was probably about 8 feet tall and a little bit lighter. But just there, it's my opinion that when people go into shock, they think that they could see when it's no big deal, but they're not ready to see how enormous these creatures, these animals actually are. And that's what stops people in their tracks. I think it's something inherent in all of us that when we either see something that large that's not supposed to exist, that it scares us to act out or just to shut down and not move.
Here at Bigfoot Society, our goal is to provide a platform for those that have encountered Bigfoot to share their encounter in a safe environment. But we need to hear your story. If you've experienced something that you just can't explain, please send me an email at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Then we can start the conversation. And I know a lot of you have not shared your encounter at all. It's been 20 years. And it's time that you get this off your chest, and then you can get some well-deserved rest, because I know you haven't been sleeping. I understand what you're going through, and I appreciate every one of you listening.